Hotel Pierre address. Howard Scott. 1933. This lecture was given on January 13, 1933 in the Hotel Pierre in New York City. Technocracy, speaking tonight from Regional Division 7340, salutes the radio audience of America. At the outset, Technocracy desires it to be understood that all of this publicity has broken upon it like nothing else that has happened to any similar organization in the history of man. Months ago we were unknown, working quietly as a non-profit research organization which in the year 1932 had expended less than $1,200 for administrative purposes and had received not more than $300 exclusive of the subscriptions of its members. To date it has written fewer than 14,000 words but, judging from the response on this continent and abroad, those 14,000 words have done their work well, too well perhaps, since most of the clamor in the press, pulpit and elsewhere is not, of necessity, the slightest genuine connection with the work, data and principles of technocracy. Let it be said also that most of the many attacks against us originate in the camps of the liberals, economists, social philosophers and others of the tribe of axiologists who are all interested in the preservation of values that have no functional relationship to the problems of a modern industrial society. These attacks, however beneficial to newspaper and publishing interests, have added nothing to a proper understanding of our work. Technocracy is a dual thing. On the one hand it is an organization of scientists, engineers, technologists and workers in other technical fields. On the other, it is a body of thought. This body of thought may be concisely described as a technological approach to, and an analysis of, all social phenomena. Technocracy is not premised on any philosophical preconceptions, convictions or beliefs. Technocracy is based primarily on a study of the rates of growth of all energy-consuming devices on this continent as a function of time. Technocracy is concerned with the natural resources available for conversion into use forms and their quantities. With the quantity of energy and materials consumed in the proper operation of the physical equipment on this area. With the number of people required in this total operation and the hours of work within a given time. These are some of the principal questions with which technocracy has always been, and is now, concerned. Tonight we would like to take this gathering and the radio audience of this continent back a few pages in the history of this country and in the biologic progression of man. Ever since man was driven from the jungle by his more agile but less enterprising relative, the ape, he has been conducting a long and arduous struggle, finding his way toward ever more effective sources of energy. In this struggle the problem of population has come to play an increasingly important part. For example, in the 200,000 years prior to 1800 the biologic progression had so far advanced that the total world population of the human species in the latter year was approximately 850 million. In the subsequent 132 years this population grew until it is now approximately 1,800,000,000, a greater increase than in the previous 200,000 years. The point to be especially noted is that most of this population increase is due to the introduction of technological procedures into social life. By way of contrast, consider China. According to the Nanking estimates of 1932, China has a population of 470 million today, an estimated growth of only 71 million in the past 2 centuries. France, according to the estimates of Reed, Baker, and others, would require over 400 years to double its present population of approximately 40 million. Both of these countries are admittedly backward in their rates of growth on the technological level. That is to say, neither of them has taken full advantage of the incentive to population increase afforded by the introduction of technological procedures into their social life. Compare these examples with the United States. In 1830, slightly over a century ago, this country had a little more than 12 million people. Today the figure is approximately 122 million, an increase of 10 times in a century. Now set these figures against the background of the energy consumption during the same period. In 1830 we were consuming as a nation less than 75 trillion British thermal units of total extraneous physical energy derived principally from windmills and domestic animals with some coal and water power. In 1929 we consumed slightly less than 27,000 trillion British thermal units of extraneous physical energy, an increase in the century of 353 times. What is the drift of such facts, which can be supported and strengthened from many sources? Technocracy points out that in all social systems prior to the last 200 years man was the chief engine of energy conversion. Efficient from the mechanical point of view, this engine was severely limited in output, rating at approximately 1/10 horsepower per 8-hour day. All the work and wealth of human society from the dawn of recorded history to the beginning of the 18th century depended exclusively upon this engine. Thus we have Adam Smith, in the opening sentence of his famous book, published in the same year as America's Declaration of Independence and, ironically, within a short distance of the town where James Watt was developing his steam engine, defining wealth in terms of human labor, which in turn created all values. This was a correct description of the conditions of which Adam Smith wrote, but it has since become increasingly evident that man, as a creator of physical wealth, is receding more and more into the background, yielding, and not unwillingly, to the rapid growth of technology and of power procedures. Technocracy emphasizes that in all the older social systems there was no means of altering the rate of doing work. You could increase the total number of human beings only up to the physical limits of the area in which they lived. That limit reached, migration was the only alternative to the reduction of population by mass famine. On this continent, a century ago, the log cabins of our forefathers required for their operation and maintenance only the simplest of water wheels and windmills. There was no integration, no coordination or synchronization. The individual ego could be exercised to the full, and each local area could be manipulated according to the whims of the individual operator. At this point we come to the basic question, the operation of a physical apparatus. The law of impact states that when two ox carts collide at 3 miles per hour there is no great danger of any serious results, and at this rate in an ox cart civilization you could do without good roads and stringent driving regulations. The driver could fall asleep, and even when awake required only moderate intelligence to prevent the mild order of disaster which might result from inattention. But increase the speed of the vehicle and the sequence of operations instantly changes. With a modern automobile you require not only roads but good roads. You cannot drive at 60 miles an hour on blind earth. The faster your rate of motion the smoother must be the path you traverse. Speeds of that order require a given curvature of road to prevent disaster, the maximum curvature possible for a road designed to carry traffic at any given speed can be determined in advance, and this determination will have no regard of the personal idiosyncrasies and capacities of the operator. We have been experiencing a change in the magnitude of social operations due to the accelerating rate of doing work on this continent. For precisely the same reasons we must consider, quantitatively, without personal allowances, the proper conditions under which this work may be accomplished smoothly. It has often been said that if we could take the Chinese and somehow raise them bodily to the standard of living that prevails on the American continent, not only China and the Orient would be benefited thereby, but prosperity would return to the United States and the Occident. Such reasoning is characteristic of the present confusion in social thinking, which is still based upon the classical economics of human labor and value. When, however, one realizes that prior to 1830 we, on this continent and everywhere else in the world, consumed not over 2,000 kcal of extraneous energy per capita per day, and that in 1929 we, on this continent alone, consumed a maximum of 154,000 kcal of extraneous energy per capita per day. When we realize this, the problem of China takes on a new and unsuspected aspect. In brief, in order to raise the standard of living of China to the present level of the North American continent, it would be necessary to expend 2.5 times the total energy consumed by the entire globe in 1929, a little puzzle which we may reasonably doubt even the capacity of the Chinese to solve. Now, in 1933, after 3 years of the most unprecedented conditions that this country has ever known, when the oscillations of production have gone to greater extremes than have ever been witnessed in any preceding depression, we find ourselves with more unemployed than we had total population a century ago. Each succeeding declination in the production curves of pig iron or of almost any other major industrial commodity swings lower, calling more forcibly to our attention the problems peculiar to a society increasingly dependent upon the correct operation of its physical equipment. It is these problems which technocracy now poses, stating in particular that the continued substitution of physical energy for man-hours results, not in technological unemployment, but in a reduction of total employment and of total purchasing power. Granting this inexorable replacement of human labor by physical energy, technocracy makes the further statement that such a condition brings the social mechanism of this continent into sharp conflict with the interference control vested in the price system of production. The price system, which we have defined as any exchange or energy flow control founded upon a commodity valuation, originated under those social conditions where human labor was the prime factor in the performance of work and the creation of wealth. The values upon which the system rests and by which alone it may continue to function might be described as the condensation of human perspiration. Once you eliminate that, sheer human toil becomes functionally insignificant. You have struck at the very heart of the price system. Fundamental postulate is the continuance of man-hours as an appreciable factor in the total energy consumed by society. You cannot continue to eliminate man-hour and expect the price system to remain stable. It will go out of balance in proportion to the rate of social change, and social change is here quantitatively defined as proportional to the rate of substitution of extraneous physical for man-hours in the operation and maintenance industrial social mechanism. By way of illustration, our first blast furnace in Massachusetts turned out approximately 3 tons of pig iron a week. My authority here is a published advertisement of the New York Trust Company. A modern furnace, operating with less than half of the earlier total of men per furnace, will do over 1,000 tons per day. Are speaking, remember, of changes of rate, not total employees in the iron and steel industries. The number of people required to shovel sand, coal or by individual labor may be realized when you watch a power shovel with a 100-foot beam and a 95-foot moving 15 or 18 cubic yards of material a vertical distance equivalent to a 6-story building. Just how laborers would be required to move one load of that shovel an equal distance. We are not here attempting to say, as many of critics charge us with saying, that America is on the verge of chaos or an evil doom. We have merely maintained that if present trends continue, and we see no chance of them abating, you may expect a greater unemployment in this country within 18 months at the present rate of these trends, and assuming continuance, it is conservative to envisage a total unemployment in the United States within this period of 20 million. We make this statement knowing full well that moratoriums, inflation, and all other possible palliative are going to be attempted with all the astuteness and dexterity that political chicanery can bring to bear in dealing with the problems of this continent. We know also that the debt merchants will exercise their legerdemain to the full in order to save the face of the present situation. Inflation, which is now one of the prime concerns of Congress, would be of real interest only to those who possess above a certain number of debt claims, because they alone can go into debt fast enough to take advantage of inflation. The man who works for wages or a salary cannot go into debt and thus cannot take advantage of inflation, the privilege of debt being in other hands, the slightest genuine connection with the work, data and principles of technocracy. Let it be said also that most of the many attacks against us originate in the camps of the liberals, economists, social philosophers and others of the tribe of axiologists who are all interested in the preservation of value. The Hotel Pierre Address. Howard Scott. 1933. This lecture was given on January 13, 1933 in the Organization in the History of Man. Months ago we were unknown, working quietly as a non-profit research organization which in the year 1932 had expended less than $1,200 for administrative purposes and had received not more than $300 exclusive of the subscriptions at Hotel Pierre in New York City. Technocracy, speaking tonight from Regional Division 7340, salutes the radio audience of America. At the outset, Technocracy desires it to be understood that all of this publicity has broken upon it like nothing else that has happened to any sim of its members. To date it has written fewer than 14,000 words, but, judging from the response on this continent and abroad, those 14,000 words have done their work well, too well perhaps, since most of the clamor in the press, pulpit and elsewhere is not, of necessity,